You're listening to The People's Voice, June 23rd to 30th, 2024. Two significant developments regarding U.S.-Cuba relations took place in May, which may suggest the U.S. government is testing the waters of a new strategy on Cuba. On May 15th, the United States government said that it had removed Cuba from the list of states that do not fully cooperate with U.S. counterterrorism efforts. According to the U.S., the rationale for this move was Colombian President Gustavo Petro's 2022 suspension of the extradition warrants for former Colombian guerrillas living in Cuba, which was earlier cited by Donald Trump as the rationale for placing Cuba on the state sponsor of terrorism list in 2021. Later that same month, the U.S. Treasury Department made amendments to the Cuban Assets Control Regulations to promote internet freedom in Cuba and support independent Cuban private sector entrepreneurs, expanding access to certain financial services for the Cuban people. This meant that social media would expand its presence in Cuba, and private business owners would be able to open U.S. bank accounts and bank online. These policy changes have the potential to create positive results for the Cuban people, and are to some degree welcome. But Cuba also remains skeptical to policies that facilitate access to dollars through U.S. bank accounts and multiply online channels for disseminating propaganda. The U.S. has a thoroughly documented history of supporting terrorist attacks in Cuba, while the Cuban state, in contrast, has consistently fought terrorism internationally, even inside the United States. In addition to its strong relations with neighborhood powers, Cuba is expanding relations with Russia, Iran, and China, who continue to defy the U.S. blockade by sending aid. China, in particular, has offered significant debt relief to Cuba, has plans to integrate Cuba further into the Belt and Road Initiative, and is helping the small island nation achieve energy independence through partnerships in oil drilling and solar energy farms. Perhaps this is the new impetus for Washington's recent shift in its strategic approach to Cuba. The Secretary-Treasurer of the Ontario Federation of Labour recently called on Black trade unionists to continue their important role in anti-apartheid struggles. At its 53rd International Convention, the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists passed a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire, humanitarian aid for Gaza, an embargo on arms sales, the release of all hostages, and the right to Palestinian self-determination. The Coalition of Black Trade Unionists tasks itself with building unity between labor and other pro-peace organizations to strengthen the Palestinian solidarity movement and end Israel's war on Gaza. As the largest black labor organization in the US and Canada, it plays a special role in the struggle for workers' rights, democracy, and peace internationally. The Coalition of Black Trade Unionists Region 1 additionally seeks to fight against the political and racist attacks on the movement for a free Palestine happening in Canada. It says the Ontario government's ban on keffiyehs is a racist tactic that seeks to divide the working class, stoke demoralization, and promote false narratives about Palestinian people. Manitoba's NDP government recently pushed through more than 20 pieces of new legislation all at once. While the Progressive Conservative opposition claims the circumvention of a public hearing denies Manitobans their democratic rights, there has been little debate or discussion on the actual substance of the bills, which included a long-awaited commitment to labor with major implications for the working class in the years to come. The bill updates provincial labor laws to permit single-step union certification known as card check, and bans the employment of replacement workers during strikes and lockouts. With these changes, Manitoba will soon become one of 4 provinces with card check legislation, which is a major step to erasing the decades-long erosion of workers' rights to free association and collective bargaining. Anti-scab legislation has been a core demand of labor since the 1970s. Working people set this agenda, not the NDP, and now it falls to an independent labor movement to wield these advantages as a weapon in the hands of the workers rather than a feather in the cap of an uncommitted political consultancy. Ontario's former Minister of Education spent several weeks reminding people of the Ford government's plan to rein in the so-called excesses of teachers and school boards and return education back to basics. Among these announcements is an expansion of existing policies around cell phone usage, now requiring school boards to adopt policies which were previously voluntary. Under the old regime, Ontario school boards had the authority to enact policies that would limit student access to their own personal devices at teachers' discretion. As a consequence, there has been a lack of enforcement in classroom cell phone usage, which the government argues has left students unengaged in the classroom. The Tories also say that this exposure to the internet is a factor in numerous mental health effects that are detrimental to student welfare at school. However, despite this stated intention to improve consistency, support student learning, and limit the harm caused to young people's mental health, the announcement came as a political expedient to stir up the news cycle about how Tories have been chronically underfunding public education. The Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives says that by 2022, the per-student funding that Ontario provides to school boards as part of their overall funding formula for schools has already declined by $800 per year, and in the most recent budget has gone down by as much as $1,500 per year. Teachers were recently awarded an arbitration settlement for their contracts, which resulted in salary settlements of nearly triple the government's offer of 1.25%. The narrative feed through the mainstream media is that increased wages for teachers is at odds with the support students receive in schools. In reality, however, education workers are the foundation of the support that students receive, and it is the strangulating effects of the funding formula that leads to fewer support workers, limited resources, larger class sizes, teacher shortages, and an overall reduction in specialty programming. After over a month, the student encampments demanding divestment from Israeli apartheid at both the University of Winnipeg and the University of Manitoba continue on while students' demands remain unfulfilled. The University of Winnipeg Faculty Association was the first faculty association in Canada to call for a ceasefire. Jason Hanan, professor of writing, rhetoric, and communications, said that our students at this encampment have made their demands simple and clear. The University of Winnipeg, including the University of Winnipeg Foundation, must disclose, divest, and cut its financial ties with investments in Israeli and international companies, banks, and manufacturers, including those here in Canada that support and profit from the apartheid-occupying state of Israel directly or indirectly in accordance with the global boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. The University of Winnipeg must cease to support and profit from genocide. A member of the encampment, dubbed the People's University for Palestine Treaty 1, described the kind of educational space that the encampments represented. For 4 weeks, we have been constructing a better world in miniature, a world where we nourish each other, care for each other, and keep each other safe. Here in our little society, learning is not locked behind extortionate tuition, but instead free and accessible through teach-ins and a public library. Here we value and nurture everyone's skills and voices. We listen to and learn from one another with open hearts and minds. We continue to build the world we always knew was possible. That's all for now. If you're interested in strengthening working class press here in Canada, consider lending your support to the People's Fund Drive at pvonline.ca/donate.